Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week marked the start of Ramadan for Scotland's Muslim community, and I'm sure the whole Chamber will join me in wishing everyone observing Ramadan peace and happiness. For years, drug deaths have been Scotland's national shame. This week it emerged that drug deaths have risen again, up 10% on the previous year. Humza Yousaf's new Minister for Drugs, Christina McKelvey, was asked for her response. She said the plan is working. Surely the First Minister can't agree with that.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I also wish Muslims here in Scotland, across the UK and right across the world a happy Ramadan, though my thoughts are often with those in Muslim communities who are fasting or cannot access food or water, not out of choice because of their fasting for Ramadan, but because of poverty or indeed conflict. Presiding Officer, in terms of the drugs deaths, let me say first and foremost that my condolences and the condolences of the entire government are with every single person that has lost a loved one to suspected drugs deaths. But we know, of course, from engaging with those families, it's not warm words, it's not words of sympathies or condolence. They want it is action. And I am devastated to see that rise, particularly as, of course, we saw and witnessed some progress in the year before with a reduction in suspected drugs deaths. This is a deep-rooted endemic problem in our society. And what I would say to Douglas Ross is that we are taking a range of significant actions to try to tackle this insidious problem in our society. We're absolutely committed. We have an unwavering, unshakable commitment to the national mission to tackle drugs death. And that's why we've continued to expand residential rehab. And I can give some more detail of that in subsequent answers. We've provided £50 million a year to community and grassroots organisations that are helping those in their local areas suffering with substance abuse and addiction. We've progressed work with local authorities like Glasgow and safer consumption rooms. We've continued to roll out the carriage of naloxone and drive up the MAT standards, as well as a range of other actions. And what we'll continue to do is make sure that we maintain the drugs budget as well for 24-25. So this rise is deeply disheartening. This rise in suspected drug deaths is deeply disheartening. But what it will only serve to do from a government's perspective is ensure that we continue to rededicate ourselves and recommit ourselves to tackling one of the most insidious challenges and problems that we face in our society.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister referenced last year's figures, and at the time, the former Drugs Minister said in August last year that the government was turning the tide on the drug death crisis. We now hear from the current Drugs Minister that even with a 10% increase, she believes the plan is working. It is absolutely not. Drug deaths in Scotland have consistently been the highest across Europe, and they're on the rise again. The SNP plan is not working. And they seem to be repeating the same mistakes all over again. Nicola Sturgeon let a rehab facility in her own constituency close in 2019. Now Humza Yousaf has let Turning Point 218, a vital rehab service for women in Glasgow, close. The head of justice at Turning Point Scotland said this: "The loss of this service is likely to lead to more women in custody and trapped within the justice system." And the First Minister himself said in this chamber just in January that it does excellent work. He continued, "I value the project very highly." Just a few weeks later, it closed. So why did this happen?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I just give an absolute confirmation that the Drugs Minister, Christina McKelvey, and I, during our visit to the Bothy, an excellent community project based in Craigmillar, the Minister for Alcohol and Drugs Policy absolutely believes, as I do, that we have to rededicate ourselves and take further action because we know, of course, that rise is unwelcome. And Douglas Ross is right to say that our numbers of suspected drug deaths per head of the population is higher than other parts of the UK. Other parts of the UK have also seen a rise, and I suspect part of that is because of the tide that we are up against. That is, of course, seeing more potent, stronger, more addictive substances on our streets, such as synthetic opioids, nitazines, and so on and so forth. But there is absolutely no complacency about the action that we have to take. In relation to 218, Presiding Officer, it's an important issue that is raised. It should be said that was a council decision, not our decision, of course. The only decision that we made from a Scottish Government perspective was when Glasgow City Council asked whether or not they could retain the £1.5 million funding for retendering to another service. We said that we would allow them to retain that money, to be able to use it flexibly. It would also not be correct to say that there aren't facilities for women in particular that are facing substance abuse in Glasgow. There's a whole range, and I'm happy to release the letter that we received from the Health and Social Care Partnership. We have tomorrow Women's Group, a community-based service for women involved in the justice system. We have the Glasgow Drugs Court, which we know operates a women's-only clinic a day a week. We have 59, or Glasgow has 59 purchased residential placements that are both for men and women in alcohol and drug recovery services. There's 60 tenancy-sustained placements specifically open to those in justice social work.
First Minister.
A gender-specific community support service. And there are other services which I'm happy to talk to and further answer. So what I would say is we continue to provide record funding this year to our alcohol and drugs partnerships. We'll continue to take actions with our local authorities. And of course, I'm happy to continue to work cross-party, as my predecessor did, work cross-party, in order that we all collectively work together to tackle what is one of the most challenging issues our society faces.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister wants to dodge responsibility for the closure of this vital service that has served women in Glasgow for 2 decades. So let's just listen to what the Unite Regional Officer Linda Wilson said. This is her words. It's utterly shameful that both Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government believe the best way to help vulnerable women is to cut beds and slash the funding of a lifeline service. And newspaper reports today include emails that suggest the Government was aware that Turning Point would be closed but didn't step in to prevent it. Unite say it was crystal clear that the Scottish Government was central to the decision-making process which led to the 218 service closing. Humza Yousaf is trying to avoid responsibility. He's using the same excuses as Nicola Sturgeon. So why are the SNP making the same mistakes all over again?
First Minister.
Well, let me try to, of course, inject also some of the facts into this discussion, Presiding Officer. We are not cutting beds. Under the Scottish Government, we've invested £38 million in expanding capacity in residential rehab as part of the national mission. We, of course, have 32 of these beds are operational. We have another 38 in the pipeline just over the next few months. And with the projected funding that we have, we believe we're absolutely on track to meet our commitment on increasing overall residential rehab capacity from 425 to 650 by 2026. We're also very much on target in relation to the targets that we've set ourselves for publicly funded rehab placements. So the suggestion, as Douglas Ross made it, that we're cutting residential rehab beds is simply not true. In terms of the decision that was made by Glasgow City Council in 218, again, I'm happy to release these letters if they have not been released already. If I go back to what one of our officials or civil servants wrote to Glasgow City Council, and I'll quote directly from the letter, Presiding Officer, we consider that any decision to re-tender the service, that's the 218 service, is entirely a matter for Glasgow City Council, but can confirm we have no objection to the replacement service utilising the funding currently allocated to the 218 service. So we, of course, did the right thing by ensuring that funding was flexible for the local authority. And what we now see, of course, that in Glasgow City Council, there are a range of initiatives that are still available for women to be able to access, whether that's, for example, the Lilius Community Custody Centres based in Glasgow, and practice has evolved greatly in supporting all women currently serving sentences in the establishment, or whether it's Glasgow Women Aid, Himmet Greif, Glasgow East Women's Aid, they can provide up to 64 safe places for women and SAY women who support women 16 to 25, have 9 spaces in purposely built flats as well. So there's a range of initiatives. I'm happy to write to Douglas Ross with detail of how we're supporting Glasgow City Council and other local authorities in ensuring that they increase residential rehab, not decrease it.
Douglas Ross.
I don't know how the First Minister can possibly stand there and say he is supporting people who are struggling when a facility has closed after 20 years of supporting vulnerable women. And the Government were involved. Emails that were published in the newspaper article to say, today said that the tendering of 218 was with relevant ministers for review, and that another email
Members,
referred,
let's hear Mr Ross.
Another email referred to the likelihood of needing ministerial clearance for any new approach. That's in the emails that have been published today. And during the SNP leadership contest, Humza Yousaf said, if there's more money, we need we can give to alcohol and drugs in particular, then that's going to be a priority focus for me. Well, it's clear it's not a priority. Nicola Sturgeon cut funding for drug treatment in 2015 and drug deaths rose. This year, Humza Yousaf has cut the treatment budget in real terms. They promised to create hundreds of new rehab beds, but they've managed just over 30. The addiction crisis in Scotland is out of control. Since the SNP came to power, drug deaths have doubled. They are the worst in Europe, and new figures show deaths are increasing again. Scotland's shame has not gone away. Nicola Sturgeon admitted she took her eye off the ball. Hasn't Humza Yousaf done exactly the same?
First Minister.
No, Presiding Officer, I reject that in its entirety. Let's try to take some of the issues that Douglas Ross mentioned in his question. The drugs budget, of course, we have increased over the years. The increase of funding into drugs policy that we have presided over the last, for example, if I take 2014-15 to 23-24, that's a 67% increase in funding. That's by Audit Scotland figures that were recently published. The draft budget for 24-25 has maintained our budget for alcohol and drugs at the same level this year. And of course, this year, we've seen record funding, £113 million, into alcohol and drugs partnerships. Douglas Ross references if there was more money. The point is, of course, we've had a £500 million real terms cut to our budget by the UK government. If, of course, Douglas Ross is able to convince his colleagues south of the border to give further funding to Scotland, then I absolutely promise him that drugs and alcohol policy will be one of the areas that we look to give further funding to. In terms of the action that we are taking, again, I'm happy to write to Douglas Ross with more detail. We have, of course, ensured that there's greater carriage of naloxone, over 150,000 kits. We are working with Greater Glasgow and Glasgow City Council on more radical approaches, such as a safe consumption room. We are increasing numbers of beds in terms of residential rehab, and, as I say, continue to work with local authorities to help tackle this issue. I make that offer that I've made already to Douglas Ross, to others right across the chamber, that we are willing to work cross-party in order to resolve what is one of the most difficult challenges this country has faced, and an issue that has plagued our society not just for years, Presiding Officer, but for decades.